Missionary Ridge local train. We are glad to have you aboard today. Now, on our ride, we will cross over 4 bridges and pass through pre-Civil War Missionary Ridge Tunnel. When we arrive at East Chattanooga, we'll be able to get off the train there to watch the engine turn on the turntable before we reboard for the return trip. Now, for everyone's safety and in order to maintain social distancing, please utilize whichever seats the train crew has indicated and remain seated throughout the ride until instructed to move upon our arrival in East Chattanooga. We will be unloading by individual car color in East Chattanooga using your corresponding wristband color coding. We appreciate your cooperation and patience as this will take a little bit of time. Now, on our ride today, we will be crossing over those 4 bridges and passing through pre-Civil War Missionary Ridge Tunnel. The route that we're using today was put down in 1858 as the East Tennessee, Virginia, and Georgia Railroad. It was merged into the Southern Railway system in 1894 to become part of a larger rail network in this area. And around 1915, the Southern did some upgrading on the line. They reduced some of the curvature and the gradient. They double-tracked the line, and they rebuilt the bridges to accommodate those extra tracks, as well as raising the bridge height over Chickamauga Creek to get away from the floodplain. One thing they couldn't do anything about was Missionary Ridge Tunnel. Old, narrow, single-track tunnel. It was a bottleneck on the line. Always had trains waiting to go through the tunnel. Now, surprisingly, the railroad lived with that situation until the 1950s, at which time it became a breaking point. They were going to have to do something about that tunnel, either enlarge it, which would take it out of service for an extended period, build a new tunnel, which would be extremely expensive, or do maybe what they should have done in the first place and simply go around the end of the ridge. Well, that's what they did. You may have noticed the tracks up on the hillside adjacent to Grand Junction Station. May have seen a freight train or 2 go by. That is the current Norfolk Southern Main Line that bypasses the line we're using today. It was double track all the way around the end of the ridge and into downtown Chattanooga. Now, when this was downgraded, it was used for some light switching duties, but it was finally abandoned completely. And in 1968, the Southern Railroad donated property in East Chattanooga and the old railroad right-of-way up to and through Missionary Ridge Tunnel to the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum, and our volunteers came in and started rebuilding those tracks. We'll continue that history here shortly, but for now, we're going to be crossing over Chickamauga Creek. As we cross over, on the left-hand side, you can look down and see some of the earlier bridge piers, also the CSX main line up the creek there. On the right, we can see the CSX Tyner Branch Trestle and the Lightfoot Mill Road Bridge. Next, we'll pass by the McCarty Storage Siding. This is the only remnant of the double-track main line. Put a couple of switches in here and have some equipment parked. Now, some of it may look like junk to you, but I promise you it's not. We do tend to keep our old parts and equipment. You never know when we might need it in the future. At some point, we realized we can no longer go to the local parts store and buy train parts. They do not keep them in stock. After passing the McCarty siding, we will cross over a set of railroad tracks on the bridge here. Underneath us will be the CSX Railroad. That's their main line between Atlanta and Chattanooga. The very first railroad into town in 1850, the Western and Atlantic Railway. Now, maybe you've never heard of the Western and Atlantic, but maybe you've heard of the great locomotive chase or the Andrews Raid. And that's the railroad, the Western Atlantic, where that took place, although it didn't quite make it to Chattanooga. And that was the episode during the Civil War when James Andrews and his raiders put a plan together, and they decided they were going to steal a train in Georgia and destroy the railroad supply line between Atlanta and Chattanooga by burning bridges, removing rails, and cutting telegraph wires. They actually had a pretty good plan, and it might have turned the tide of the war, except for a couple of things. Number one, it had rained for several days prior to the raid. Hard to burn anything when it's soaking wet. Number two, they didn't count on the persistence of the conductor. See, back in those days, there were no dining cars on the trains. They would have locations pre-selected. They would stop and allow people to get off the train to have something to eat. That morning in April of 1862, the train made its morning breakfast stop in Big Shanty, Georgia, around Marietta, and most everyone got off the train. That's when the raiders went into action. They jumped aboard Locomotive General, disconnected the passenger cars, and took off towards Chattanooga. Now, I can almost picture the conductor of the train, William Fuller, in the adjacent hotel building eating his breakfast. There he was, eating his eggs. He looked out the window, and there went his train without him. He was not happy either. He actually chased the train on foot for several miles, later commandeered several push carts, and even later several locomotives. He ended up with Locomotive Texas running full speed in reverse in pursuit of the raiders. And by full speed, I mean like 20, 25 miles an hour. Well, because of that pursuit, the raiders were not only not able to do the destruction they had planned, they couldn't even get up, stop and pick up fuel for their locomotive or pick up water. Therefore, they did make it through the tunnel at Tunnel Hill, steamed around the bend past the depot in Ringgold, and shortly thereafter ran out of steam. They abandoned their locomotive and scattered into the woods. They were later caught, and most of them were hung for their crimes, although they were the very first recipients of the Congressional Medal of Honor. All of them, that is, except for James Andrews, the leader. He was a civilian, so he was not eligible. All the other participants were Northern enlisted. Now, most of them are buried in Chattanooga National Cemetery. We do have an interesting note about that for you. We've been told for anyone who currently lives in Chattanooga, they cannot be buried in that cemetery. There's an important reason why. Because you have to be dead first. Insert your own rib shot there. Boo. Now there's another first that's associated with Chattanooga in addition to the Medal of Honors. And by the way, we do have a brand new Medal of Honor Heritage Center in Chattanooga that tells the story of many of the recipients of that honor, including the Andrews Raiders. We do recommend that. But there's another first associated with Chattanooga. What do you think when you hear the word Chattanooga? Isn't there a song about a train? Yes, the Chattanooga Choo Choo. That song was made famous by Glenn Miller's orchestra in the 1940s, and it received the very first gold record ever awarded by RCA. Now, folks, it's not too hard to imagine traveling on this line, maybe shortly after the turn of the century, and you go through the tunnel here into downtown Chattanooga. Passengers would disembark at Terminal Station, which opened in 1909. By the way, we are approaching Missionary Ridge. The engineer's blowing the warning signal right now. Missionary Ridge Tunnel took 2 years to complete. Between 1856 and 1858, it was dug out by hand. It was formally dedicated in 1859. Almost a little less than 1,000 feet, about 979 feet long. So we'll be passing through the tunnel here in just a moment. Easy way to tell that we're in the tunnel. It will be dark outside the train cars. As we pass through, think about the hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of trains that have passed through this tunnel since it was completed over 150 years ago. There was only a period of about 10 or 15 years when there were no tracks at all through the tunnel before it was reactivated by the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum. Okay, the light at the end of the tunnel. Well, this time it was not an oncoming train. That's good. This side of the ridge is called West Portal. It's where some of the fiercest fighting in the Battle of Missionary Ridge occurred during the Civil War. It was also the location of the control tower. Like I mentioned earlier, Southern had double-tracked this line around 1915, all except for the tunnel, of course. And for some reason, the railroad only wanted one train going through that single-track tunnel at a time. Well, the control tower was put in here, stayed in operation until the switches could be automated and electrically operated from the downtown rail yard. At that time, it was Southern Railroad Citico Yard. That's pretty much the same location as the current Norfolk Southern's DeButch Yard. We're getting ready to cross over that fourth bridge. Now don't blink or you'll miss this one. About a 1.5 lane underpass there where Autry and Arno streets converge. And you might also notice that the bridges on our line are They have enough room for that second span for the additional track, all of them, of course, except for Tunnel Boulevard. That bridge was built brand new in 1977 for our use. Now to continue the history of the line and the Railroad Museum, 1968, Southern donated part of the property to the Railroad Museum. We started rebuilding the line, one track, one rail and tie at a time. By the mid-1970s, we had made it through Missionary Ridge Tunnel, and by the later 1970s, we had made it to Tunnel Boulevard. At Tunnel Boulevard, there had been an underpass where the roadway passed underneath the rail line, and that road was called Tunnel Boulevard, and that got its name from the underpass itself. It looked like a tunnel, so the locals called it Tunnel Boulevard. Well, that was removed by the city for clearance issues when the railroad was abandoned above. Therefore, there was no way across Tunnel Boulevard until we built a new bridge in 1977, and the agreement was with the Southern Railroad, if we built the bridge, they'd give us the second portion of the preserved rail line. So that's how we ended up with the full 3 miles for today's 6-mile round trip. Now, folks, we will be pulling in to East Chattanooga here in just a moment. And this is where we'll be able to get off the train to watch the engine turn on the turntable. Now, this is going to be a little bit of a process as far as unloading and even the reloading. But we ask that you stay seated until we call for your car color to unload. After our tour, and we return to the train and we assist you with the boarding by colors, we ask that you return to the same car color as corresponding to your wristband, but also to the same seat. And there are seat numbers. They are above the seats, above the windows, and please make a note of those seat numbers. So after the tour here at East Chattanooga and you reboard, please return to these same
Yeah, that's good. Don't touch it or it'll make it walk like that. I'm trying to blow it off. Okay? Yes, sir.
A line of fire.
That girl is full of vitamins, folks.
The best part of the show. The good part of the show.
Yep. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we want to welcome all of you to the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum's East Chattanooga Terminal. We're glad to have you with us today. Of course, we've just ridden over one of the oldest railroad lines in this area. Completed in 1858 is the East Tennessee, Virginia, and Georgia Railroad. We crossed over the 4 bridges and went through pre-Civil War Missionary Ridge Tunnel. And now we're in East Chattanooga, at the end of the line. So what we're going to do is turn our locomotive around on the turntable. Now, turntables are very important during the days of steam engines. Steam locomotives are designed to operate forward primarily. Now, they can back up, but it's rather inefficient. The engineer has to look backwards. He has a coal tender blocking his view, so it's not an easy thing to do. By the way, did everyone know that steam locomotives have tender behinds? They do, so now you know. Now, when the diesel engines came along, turntables are really no longer needed. They were used for steam engines primarily. When the diesel engines came along, they were designed to operate forward or reverse just about as easily, so turntables weren't needed. Most of them were removed, scrapped, and lost to history. So we're lucky to have our turntable. This table was built in 1916, originally installed in Macon, Georgia, later moved to Cedartown, Georgia, because they needed a larger turntable in Macon for the larger locomotives. And in Cedartown, it was a branch line. They had smaller engines, so they moved it to Cedartown and used it there until it was purchased by the Railroad Museum and moved here to Chattanooga. It was restored and installed. First time we used it was July 4th, 1982. So we're going to demonstrate the use of the turntable at this time. You will see in just a moment that this 80-foot turntable is almost too small for number 4501. Now, as we pull onto the table, when those first wheels start on, you might see the whole thing shake a little bit. and then we'll be rolling on out to the middle to the balancing point. This is a center balance turntable, which means there's a big 6-foot bearing under the middle that will be holding the weight. It needs to balance, and then we'll rotate. So here goes the driving wheels on. And the trailing wheels. And finally the tender. Now the engine and the tender do fit on the turntable, but there'll only be about a foot, foot and a half or so on either end between the wheel and the end of the turntable. And as we start to rotate around, we do ask that you stay behind the yellow line, because even though the engine fits on the turntable, that coupler knuckle will be sticking out, and as it rotates around, it will come very close to these handrail stanchions. So we do want you to be safe and step back. We pulled onto the turntable from track number 1. We'll do our 180-degree rotation, and we'll line up with the adjacent track, track number 2. That will allow the engineer to pull down past our train on that other track, go through a switch, and then back up and reconnect onto our train. Now let's talk about our steam locomotive. World famous steam engine number 4501. 4501 was the first Mikado type locomotive purchased by the Southern Railroad in 1911. And a Mikado engine refers to the wheel arrangement of the engine: 2 lead wheels, 8 drivers, and 2 trailing wheels. This was a successful model for the Southern, and they purchased almost 200 more. So there were about 200 of these types of locomotives. 4501 was the first one. It's also the last one left. The engine was built for the Southern, used between 1911 and 1948. It would have been scrapped as the diesel engines were coming along. However, it was purchased secondhand by the Kentucky and Tennessee Railway in Stearns, Kentucky, and renumbered to their number 12. The K&T Railroad had their own coal mine, therefore they had their own fuel source. They used this locomotive as their K&T number 12 until 1964, which was very late for operating steam engines. But like I said, they had their own fuel. It worked out well for them. But in 1964, they finally replaced the steam engines with second-hand diesel electrics. 4501 was surplus. It was purchased by the first president of the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum, Paul Merriman, for $5,000. He somehow talked the Southern into bringing it to Chattanooga for him, and it became kind of what built up the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum. And in 1966, we restored the engine, and it was leased back to the Southern Railroad for use in excursion service. It was used sporadically by Southern and Norfolk Southern until 1994, at which time it was retired. We didn't think it would ever run again, but in 2011, Norfolk Southern started their 21st Century Steam program. They wanted this engine to be part of it, so it was restored to operation. We have a large building with the Tennessee Valley Railroad sign on it. That is our East Chattanooga Shops, also called Sewell Shops, in memory of our co-founder and longtime president, Robert M. Sewell. And that is where all of our maintenance and restoration work takes place. Inside that building is the only place in North America where you'll find the 3 essential separate machines for properly maintaining steam locomotive driving wheels. We have a 90-inch wheel lathe, a quartering machine, and a journal lathe. Because of having these special machines, not only are we able to properly maintain our own locomotive wheels like those on number 4501, but we also do contract work for other steam locomotive operators around the country and even in Canada. Now, those machines were built in the 1940s, but they were restored to operation by a group of volunteers and put in service in 1997, most recently. And because of having these special machines, since that time we have probably done work on wheels from locomotives in, well, probably 2 to 3 dozen total, maybe even a few more. And the most recent set of wheels we had in the shop were from a locomotive that just was restored to operation in Florida. We also had wheels recently from an engine that's being restored in Alaska, and another one that will run on the Western Maryland Scenic in Cumberland, Maryland. pulling out of East Chattanooga. Now, I wanted to mention the depots that you're seeing now. The small depot here in East Chattanooga was the first structure that we had here at the Railroad Museum, built in 1980. And it's typical of a small city depot you may have seen around the turn of the century. The wooden construction with a covered platform is very typical of that type of depot. Now, even though that's not an original building, it does have some authentic components, including the roof supports around the body of the building. Those came to us from the depot in Athens, Tennessee. It was being torn down about the same time ours was being built, so it added that nice authentic touch, and it also came to us very well protected under about 22 coats of paint, we've been told. And that's what you get from over 100 years of service, I guess. But again, that was the first building that we constructed. It was not here during the days when this was a railroad main line. Both of our depots were built for and by the Railroad Museum. Now, the larger depot where you originally boarded, Grand Junction Station, is a fairly accurate reproduction of the depot which still stands in Tuscumbia, Alabama, as a community center. And that was a good size for us to copy. They had the depot, and then on the second level, they had their corporate offices for the railroad. So again, good size for us to copy. Our Grand Junction Station has the gift shop, ticket office, waiting room, and the Depot Deli restaurant on the first level. And on the second level, which is currently out of service, there is more storage, an additional kitchen, and a multi-purpose room that is used for exhibits and also for showing videos to school groups. So that building completed in 1985. We're going to let you enjoy the ride back to Grand Junction with minimal narration. Sit back and enjoy. Missionary Ridge just ahead. Now, even though this might be your first ride with us here at the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum, you may have seen us in the movies or on television. We do a fair amount of film production work. We do try to take advantage of those opportunities as they arise, but we've been involved with the filming of major motion pictures. The most recent was the movie 42, about the life of baseball star Jackie Robinson. Also before that, Water for Elephants with Christoph Waltz and Robert Pattinson. George Clooney spent a day with us a number of years ago filming his movie about professional football in its infancy called Leatherheads. Larry the Cable Guy was here once filming for a History Channel program, so I like to tell people at least that one day we got her done. Now we've also filmed for music videos, usually country music, since we're located as close as we are to Nashville. Country star Eric Church shot the video for his song Creepin' entirely here at the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum. Now, many famous people have ridden our trains through the years. Johnny Cash, Chris Christopherson, and even Jimmy Stewart. We're going to cross over that bridge over Tunnel Boulevard. Brand new bridge. Well, it was brand new in 1977. Now crossing back over Chickamauga Creek for the final time. Keep your eyes peeled for sharks and alligators. If you haven't seen any, well, they probably got loose from the Tennessee Aquarium. All we usually see are turtles and fish. I see a few turtles up on logs. They like to do that in the afternoon. And once again, we do want to thank you for riding with us today on the Missionary Ridge local train. Now, in most years, we do have many different special excursions, special events, trips, and different types of activities every year. Of course, this is not a normal year, but we do hope that some of these other rides will come back as well. Things such as our Chickamauga Turn and Somerville Steam Specials to Northwest Georgia. We have dinner trains. We have our satellite service out of Etowah, Tennessee, called the Hiwassee River Rail Adventure Trips. So none of these have been put back on the schedule as of yet, but hopefully in the near future they will be. One thing we do have on schedule right now is our annual Day Out with Thomas event. And that is usually in May, but it was delayed until September, and August, and it looks like it may be delayed one more time into September. So keep watching our website for information about these different trips and events. We'd love to have you come back and ride again. And we'll be pulling back into Grand Junction. We ask you to stay seated until we do come to a complete stop. And then again, we will be calling each car by car number to unload. Thanks again for riding with us. We've enjoyed having you on board. By the way, as we exit from the train, you'll go down the ramp and then turn to the left and proceed clockwise around the depot. If you'd like to re-enter the depot, please do that from the front door. And of course, restrooms are available inside, also our gift shop and the deli restaurant area.